Snow Ridge lay quaddies beneath a sky the color of pewter, its outlines softened by the kind of Christmas Eve storm folks remembered for years afterward. Snow came down in thick, swirling curtains, piling knee-deep against the sides of the clapboard buildings and burying the wagon ruts along Main Street. The wind blew low and mournful across the Montana prairie, rattling the loose shutters of the old church on the hill. That was where Henry Blackhawk spotted her. He had just finished tying a bundle of firewood to his saddle when he noticed a small figure hunched on the stone steps of the church, nearly swallowed by the drifts. The lantern tied to his saddle cast a weak circle of light that wavered in the gale, but it was bright enough to show him the shape of a woman, thin, trembling, her dress stiff with frost. He slowed his horse and dismounted, boots crunching on the frozen ground. Snow stung his face, clung to his dark hair, and caught in the worn fur of his buckskin coat. Even through the storm, Henry could hear the soft, uneven breaths of someone whose strength was nearly gone. The woman didn't lift her head until he spoke. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice carrying warmth that didn't match the night. "You'll freeze out here." She startled, looking up through eyes red from crying. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, her hair wind-tossed, her hands wrapped tight around her thin shawl, as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Henry reached into his pocket and offered her a folded handkerchief. It was clean, but patched in one corner, the kind a working man kept on hand out of habit. "Here," he said, "wipe your eyes. The wind's sharp tonight." She hesitated, then took it with numb fingers. "Thank you." The handkerchief came away wet with tears. Henry crouched so he was level with her. In the lantern glow, he noticed how young she looked, mid-20s, maybe, and how exhausted she seemed, as if she'd been running not from the storm, but from something heavier. "You got a name?" he asked. "Diana," she said softly. "Diana Moore." He nodded. "Henry Blackhawk." Another gust swept across the hilltop, hard enough to make her flinch. She drew her shawl tighter, but it wasn't nearly enough. Henry could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way her lips had gone pale. "You can't stay out here," he said. "Storm like this, even a strong man wouldn't make it till morning. My place ain't far. Come with me." She blinked, looking uncertain, almost afraid. "I don't know you." "That's true," Henry replied, "but you don't got much choice tonight. And I ain't about to leave someone to perish on a church step not on Christmas Eve." There was no boast in his tone, only simple conviction. Something about the steadiness of his voice made her believe him, if only a little. After a long, shaky breath, she nodded. "All right." Henry helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed. When she stepped closer to his horse, he noticed she limped slightly, as though she'd walked a long way on blistered feet. She tried to mount herself, but her legs buckled. "Easy," he murmured. He lifted her gently into the saddle, careful not to startle her, then swung up behind her. She sat stiffly, shivering hard. "Lean back some," Henry said. "Once we get moving, the air'll bite worse." She hesitated again. Then, with visible reluctance, she leaned back until her shoulders brushed his chest. "That's it," he murmured. "Now hold on." She wrapped her arms around him, and a faint sound, almost a sob, escaped her. Henry clicked his tongue and urged the horse forward into the storm. They rode through the white shadows in silence for several minutes, the wind tugging at their coats and the lantern swinging with each step of the horse. Snow clung to Diana's hair like scattered pearls. Henry felt her trembling ease only slightly as she settled against him. After a while, she spoke in a small voice. "You're the first man who's ever made me feel safe." Henry didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to hearing words like that, not from anyone, and certainly not from a stranger half frozen on a church step. But he heard the pain beneath her confession, and it tightened something in his chest. "Well," he said finally, "you're under my roof tonight. I'll see you stay safe." The trail sloped downward toward a cluster of cottonwoods, their branches heavy with snow. A faint yellow glow shone from a cabin window ahead, warm, steady, welcoming. "That's home," Henry said. When they reached the cabin, the door opened before he could knock. A stocky older woman stepped out, apron dusted with flour, eyes widening at the sight of the stranger. "Henry, who's this child frozen half to death?" "Found her at the church," he answered. "She needs warmth and a place to rest." Diana was helped down, ushered inside, wrapped in a quilt, and set near the stove where a pot of stew simmered. The room smelled of pine, yeast bread, and wood smoke, the scents of a lived-in home. Henry's 8-year-old son, Liam, peeked around his grandmother's skirt, eyes lighting up. "Pa, did you bring us a Christmas angel?" Diana flushed, embarrassed. "No, sweetheart, I'm just staying for the night." Henry cleared his throat, flustered by the child's blunt innocence. "She'll be in your room tonight, son. You can take the cot by the stove." Liam beamed. "Yes, sir." Diana looked up at Henry, gratitude softening her tired features. "Thank you," she whispered, "for stopping and for bringing me here." Henry shrugged lightly, but his gaze was steady. No one deserves to be alone on a night like this. Outside, the storm howled across the prairie. Inside, for the first time in months, Diana felt the faint, fragile warmth of belonging. Morning came slow and gray, the storm finally spent. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost-rimmed window of Liam's small bedroom, settling on Diana's face. She blinked awake, disoriented for a moment, until she remembered the night before. The snow, the church steps, Henry's steady voice promising safety. Beside her, the little boy slept curled like a pup, one hand resting against her arm as if afraid she might vanish. Something in that small, unconscious gesture warmed her more deeply than the heavy quilt. She slipped from the bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and stepped into the narrow hallway. The scent of frying bacon drifted from the kitchen. Diana followed it, drawn by warmth and something soft, something like family. Henry's mother, May Blackhawk, stood at the stove with her sleeves rolled up, spatula in hand. Her gray hair was braided neatly down her back, framed by the gentle lines of a woman who'd worked hard but never lost her kindness. "Well, good morning, child," May said without turning. "You slept through half the day." "I'm sorry," Diana murmured. "No need to be sorry. A body running from the cold sleeps deep." Diana stepped closer. "Is there anything I can help with?" May looked her over thoughtfully. "You can set the table if you've got the strength." "I do," Diana said, though truthfully, her legs still felt like thawing branches. As she placed the tin plates and worn utensils, the cabin door opened, and Henry stepped inside. A gust of cold air swirled around him as he kicked snow from his boots. His hair was damp from labor, his coat dusted white. He paused when he saw her. "Morning, Diana." His voice was low and warm, and something in her chest fluttered in a way that startled her. "Good morning," she replied softly. "And thank you again for everything." Henry shrugged faintly, but his eyes lingered on her a beat longer than necessary. "Nothing to thank me for. You needed help." He hung his coat and stepped to the wash basin, scrubbing his hands with cold water. Over his shoulder he added, "Storm left a foot of snow out there. You're lucky you weren't buried in it." May set a plate of bacon and hotcakes on the table. "All right, sit, eat. Worrying can wait until bellies are full." But by the time the first bite of warm food reached her mouth, Diana's mind drifted back to the reason she'd ended up on those church steps at all. Her chest tightened. Her name shouted in anger. The accusations, her father's trembling silence, and the look of triumph in her former fiancé's mother's eyes as they cast her out. Henry noticed her grip on the fork falter. "You want to talk about it?" he asked quietly. Diana swallowed hard. "I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere." His steadiness felt like a hearthstone solid beneath the flames of her hurt. She breathed in. The words came slow, halting. "I was supposed to be married 3 days ago. A quiet ceremony. Nothing fancy." She paused. May and Henry listened without judgment. "But the morning of the wedding, my fiancé's family accused me of poisoning their son. He'd taken ill fever, weakness, and they said I put something in his tonic." May gasped softly. Henry didn't react, but his eyes sharpened. "It wasn't true," Diana said, voice trembling. "I'd never hurt anyone. I tried to defend myself, but no one listened. They said the evidence was too clear to ignore. My father, he's in a wheelchair. He didn't speak up. He didn't even look at me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. Henry's jaw tensed. "You didn't poison nobody." "How do you know?" she whispered brokenly. "Because I've seen folks who lie. Their eyes shift and dodge. Yours don't." She blinked at him. That simple statement felt like being handed something precious, a piece of trust she thought she'd never feel again. May reached over to pat Diana's hand. "Sometimes fear makes good people foolish. Maybe your pa didn't know how to stand against folks with loud voices." Diana nodded weakly. Henry spoke again, quieter. "You're safe here. No one's throwing you out." Something inside Diana loosened, just a little. The cabin door creaked, and Liam stumbled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw Diana, his face lit up. "You're still here," he exclaimed. "I dreamed you left." "No, sweetheart." She smiled, heart swelling. "I'm right here." Liam ran to her, throwing small arms around her waist. It was such a simple, pure gesture that her eyes stung all over again. Henry looked away, but a faint smile tugged at his mouth. After breakfast, Henry announced he had a few pairs of boots to repair for townsfolk before the holiday ended. Diana offered to help with chores around the cabin. May approved immediately. "You've got a gentle touch," May told her later as they kneaded dough together. "This house could use that." Diana flushed with quiet pride. That afternoon, she read a newspaper aloud to Henry's father, Mr. Gideon Blackhawk, whose eyesight had weakened over the years. The old man listened with a smile, tapping his cane in rhythm as she spoke. By evening, the cabin felt less like a stranger's home and more like a place her heart recognized. Henry watched her from the doorway as she brushed snow from Liam's hair and helped him hang a tin-star ornament on the small pine tree in the corner. She moved like someone trying to remember how to breathe, and against every expectation he found himself wanting to give her space enough to heal, but also hoping she wouldn't leave too soon. Over the next several days, Snow Ridge settled into the hush that follows a great storm. The sky cleared into a wide stretch of pale blue, and sunlight glittered off the frozen fields like shards of glass. The air was crisp enough to sting the lungs, but inside the Blackhawk cabin, warmth bloomed from the big iron stove and the steady hum of life. Diana found herself slipping into the rhythm of the household, with a strange, healing ease like stepping into a song she somehow already knew the tune of. In the mornings, she helped May prepare breakfast. The older woman moved slowly now, her joints softened by age, so Diana took up much of the busy work mixing batter, slicing apples, tending the fire. May watched her with approval. "You work careful," May said one morning. "Not many girls your age take their time." "I spent years helping my father," Diana said with a soft smile. Slow and steady was how he liked things. May nodded. "Maybe that's how you got your strength." The words touched Diana deeply, more deeply than she expected. Strength. No one had called her that since her mother passed. By mid-morning, Henry would be in his small workshop out back, hammering leather and shaping soles. The rhythmic tapping carried through the frozen air like a heartbeat. Sometimes Diana would bring him coffee, walking across the yard bundled in Henry's thick coat, because her own was too thin for Montana's winter. Each time, Henry accepted the mug with quiet gratitude. "You don't need to do this," he told her one day. "I want to," she replied simply. He held her gaze for a moment, long enough for warmth to creep into her cheeks, then returned to his work. But his shoulders softened, and the line of tension in his jaw eased. Liam, meanwhile, had attached himself to Diana with the devotion of a pup. He followed her as she folded laundry, swept the porch, or fed the chickens behind the stable. "You're better at this than Pa," Liam confided one afternoon, as she tied a scarf around his neck. She laughed. "I'm sure that isn't true." "No, really," the boy insisted. "He always ties it too tight. But you do it nice, soft." The simplicity of the compliment warmed her more than the scarf she'd just wrapped around him. When it came time for lessons, Diana taught Liam his letters by the fire. He was bright, curious about everything, eager to learn. Sometimes Henry would pause in the doorway, just listening to the gentle lilt of her voice as she guided the boy through his reading. "You sound like a schoolteacher," Henry said one evening after Liam had gone to bed. "I always wanted to be one," Diana admitted, "but life didn't quite take me that way." Henry studied her with a softness she wasn't ready for. Maybe life still might. Her breath caught. But before she could respond, the cabin door opened and the late winter light spilled in, revealing Eliza Hargreave. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, stamping snow from her boots. Her blonde curls peeked from beneath her wool cap, and her eyes pale, sharp flicked immediately to Diana. "Oh," she said with false surprise, one hand resting dramatically on her chest. "Didn't know you had company, Henry." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Henry's expression cooled. "Elisa, you need something?" "I brought your flower order," she said, lifting a cloth sack. "Your mother requested it." May spoke up from her rocking chair. "That I did." "Leave it on the counter, dear." Eliza placed the sack down, but her gaze never left Diana. "So," she said sweetly, "you're the woman Henry picked up in the snow. Folks in town have been curious." Diana stiffened. Henry stepped forward just slightly, angling his body between them. "She's staying here a while," Henry said. "That's all there is to it." Eliza's eyes flashed at the subtle protectiveness in his tone. "Well, I suppose that's charitable," she said, voice dripping honey that tasted of vinegar. "I'd be careful, though. Some people bring trouble without meaning to." Diana swallowed, but she lifted her chin. "I'm only trying to help around the house." Eliza's smile thinned. "Oh, I'm sure you are." She turned to Henry. "If you need anything else, you know where to find me." When she left, the cold she carried seemed to linger in the doorway. May snorted. "That girl's got a tongue sharper than a fence wire. Pay her no mind." Diana nodded, but her stomach twisted anyway. Later that evening, while Liam played with a whittled wooden horse and May crocheted by the fire, Diana stepped outside to shake off the feeling. She pulled her shawl tight, breath forming white clouds in the air. Henry was at the fence line, checking the boards for weakness after the storm. When he noticed her, he straightened. "You all right?" She hesitated. "Eliza doesn't seem very fond of me." Henry huffed softly. "Eliza don't take kindly to anyone she can't sway. But she can't sway me, and that bothers her." Diana looked up at him, his eyes gray-green in the fading light held steady. "You're safe here, Diana," he said. "With me, with my family. Don't let her chatter take root." Her breath trembled, not from the cold. "Thank you, Henry," she whispered, "for seeing me, for believing me." For a moment, the quiet between them felt almost alive, warm as the cabin light spilling into the snow. Henry nodded once, as if settling something silently within himself. "Come on inside," he murmured. "Storms past, but the night's still cold." And together they walked back toward the glow of the cabin, toward a hymn that was slowly, steadily becoming hers. Winter deepened over Snow Ridge, though the worst of the Christmas storm had passed. The days that followed brought calm skies and a crisp stillness that made every sound carry farther across the open prairie. The creak of trees, the crackle of ice forming on the well, the distant call of crows circling the empty fields. Inside the Blackhawk home, life settled into a gentle hum. Diana had now been with the family long enough that her presence felt as natural as the steady warmth of the stove, or May's soft humming as she kneaded dough. Liam adored her. Gideon listened more eagerly to his newspapers when she read aloud. And Henry, well, Henry had begun watching her with a quiet protectiveness that could warm a house by itself. But not everyone approved of her stay. Eliza's visits grew more frequent, always under the excuse of delivering supplies, always at the most inconvenient times. Her presence drifted through the house like a draft that made the lantern flame waver. Henry avoided her with the ease of a man who had long practice ignoring unwanted attention. But Diana felt every icy glance, every sweetened insult hidden beneath polite words. She tried to shake it off. But that old hurt, the feeling of being falsely accused, cast out, unwanted, still lived like a bruise beneath her ribs. Eliza knew just where to press. One late afternoon, while Henry repaired a pair of ranch boots in his workshop and May prepared supper, Diana went out back to gather eggs. The air was sharp enough to nip fingers, but she welcomed the quiet. The yard lay peaceful beneath a layer of fresh snow, save for the thin trail of prints leading to the stable where Liam loved to play with the young colt Henry was training. At that thought, Diana felt a flicker of worry. "Liam?" she called gently as she approached the stable door. Her voice echoed. Inside, she found the boy sitting on a barrel beside the colt's stall, rubbing the animal's neck with the affectionate stubbornness only an 8-year-old could muster. His cheeks were flushed with excitement and cold. "Sweetheart," she said, kneeling beside him, "it's getting chilly. You shouldn't stay here so long." He smiled sheepishly. "Just wanted to see him one more time before supper." Diana pulled him close, wrapping her shawl around him to warm his tiny frame. "All right, but let's get you inside." As she guided him toward the house, her gaze drifted back to the stall. Something felt wrong. A faint whistle of wind pushed through the far wall. Diana frowned. The stable was usually sheltered from the harsh northern gusts. Henry always made sure the wooden panels were tightly secured during winter. But now, one of the side shutters hung open a few inches, swaying gently, creaking every time a cold blast slipped through. She stepped closer, touching the loose board. The nails had not fallen out. They had been pulled. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. Not yet. She closed the shutter firmly, then hurried after Liam. That night, long after supper had been cleared away and the house had grown quiet, Liam's soft whimper cut through the stillness. Diana was at his bedside in moments. The boy lay curled under quilts, his skin hot as a stove. His breaths came ragged and shallow, lips dry, cheeks flushed deep red. "May!" Diana called, heart pounding. "Henriette!" The family gathered quickly. Henry knelt by his son's bed, fear tightening the lines around his mouth. May pressed a cool cloth to Liam's forehead. Gideon placed a trembling hand on the boy's arm. "He was fine at supper," Henry murmured, voice strained. "What happened?" Diana hesitated, remembering the loosened shutter. "He spent time in the stable this afternoon," she said softly. The wind was coming through. It was cold, far colder than it should have been. May's eyes widened. Gideon cursed under his breath. Within the hour, word had spread. Snow Ridge was small, and rumors traveled faster than stagecoaches. By evening, neighbors had gathered outside the cabin, and with them, Eliza. Her expression was a perfect blend of worry and opportunity. "What's happened to the boy?" she asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Henry stood in the doorway, blocking her entry. "He's sick, that's all." Eliza folded her arms, her breath misting in the cold. "Sick, or something else?" Several townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Diana stood behind Henry, pale and exhausted from tending Liam. And the moment Eliza saw her, her expression sharpened. "Well," Eliza declared, "isn't it strange that the last time this young woman lived with a family, one of them suddenly fell gravely ill? Some folks call that coincidence." Her gaze flicked over the crowd. "I don't." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Diana felt her heart drop. "Not again. Please, not again." Eliza stepped forward, pointing directly at her. "You let the boy get chilled on purpose, didn't you? Figured if he got sick enough, Henry would lean on you more. A sick child is a mighty fine way to worm yourself into a man's life." "That's enough." Henry's voice cut like a whip. But Eliza wasn't finished. "She's not who you think she is," she hissed. "She's trouble. She brought nothing but sorrow to her last home, and she'll do the same here." The crowd murmured louder now. Fear has a way of clouding reason. But before Henry could speak again, Diana stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "I would never hurt Liam. He is the first child who has shown me kindness in months. This family," she drew a shaking breath, "this family is the first place I haven't felt alone." The sincerity in her voice rippled through the silence. But Eliza opened her mouth again, and Henry finally snapped. "That's enough, Eliza," he growled. "My son was chilled because someone tampered with the stable shutters. Someone pulled out the nails. Someone wanted him sick." Eliza froze. Diana held her breath. The crowd stared. Henry stepped closer to Eliza, eyes blazing not with fury, but with the pain of a father pushed too far. "You know anything about that?" he asked quietly. Eliza's face drained of color. Just as the truth began to surface, May called from inside. "Henry, he's not breathing right." The crowd gasped. Diana ran inside without another word. The battle for Liam's life and the battle for the truth had just begun. The cabin felt smaller, with fear pressing against its walls. Lamps flickered. Shadows stretched long and thin across the floorboards. Liam lay on his bed, his breath shallow. His cheeks flushed a dangerous crimson. Every exhale rattled in his chest like winter wind, forcing its way through a broken window. Diana knelt beside him, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands trembling only until she began to work. Then, a calm, steady focus settled over her like a cloak. "May," she said gently, "I need hot water and blankets warmed by the stove." May hurried away, skirts swishing, mumbling prayers as she moved. Henry hovered a step behind Diana, torn between terror and helplessness. Gideon gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles went white. "What can I do?" Henry's voice had lost its usual calm. "Tell me, Diana. Anything." She looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time, he saw her not as a frightened woman cast out by the world, but as someone fierce and capable, someone who refused to give up on a child who wasn't even hers. "Hold him upright," she said. "His lungs are fighting. We need to help him breathe." Henry moved instantly, lifting his son with the tenderness of a man who'd dropped everything he'd ever been for this boy. Liam's head rested against his chest, his tiny breaths wheezing out in uneven gasps. Diana crushed dried ginger and peppermint leaves she had brought in her small satchel, her last belongings from her old home. Mixed with boiling water, the herbs filled the room with a sharp, comforting scent. "This will open his chest," she whispered. She held the steaming cloth near Liam's face, fanning the vapor gently. The boy whimpered weakly. Henry's hold tightened. "It's all right, son," he murmured, voice breaking. "Pa's right here." Gideon bowed his head, old eyes shining with unshed tears. "He's a tough boy. Always was. He'll pull through." But even he sounded unsure. Outside, the wind howled, a lonely, hollow sound. And through the open doorway, the murmuring crowd shifted uneasily, watching the faint glow of lamplight spill across the snow. Their whispers drifted inside like smoke. Wasn't she the one accused back east? Maybe she brought bad luck with her. Eliza said. Henry turned, fury rising like a storm behind his eyes. But Diana caught his sleeve. "Don't," she whispered. "He needs you here, not out there." He swallowed his anger, nodded yes, and stayed. May returned with armfuls of warmed quilts. Diana wrapped them around Liam's small frame, careful but firm, trapping the heat close. She worked with the gentle confidence of someone who'd once nursed a sick parent, someone who knew the cost of not acting fast enough. Minutes stretched long. The cabin grew hotter. The only sounds were Liam's strained breaths and the crackle of the stove. Finally, the boy coughed, a harsh, scraping sound that bent him forward. Diana supported him, rubbing his back in steady circles. "Good," she urged softly. "Let it out, Liam. Come on, sweetheart." He coughed again, this time stronger. Then again. His breathing, though still uneven, loosened. Air moved through his chest with less struggle. Henry let out a shaky breath of his own, forehead pressing briefly against the back of his son's head. "Thank God," he murmured. "Thank God." Diana felt her own tears rise, but she blinked them away. There was still work to do. She mixed a small amount of warm honey water and coaxed Liam to sip. The boy swallowed weakly. May touched Diana's shoulder. "You saved him, child." "No," Diana whispered. "He's still fighting. But he's stronger than the sickness." Behind her, Henry stood, still holding Liam upright. But his eyes were on Diana, full of something beyond gratitude. Something fierce. Something protective. Almost reverent. Before anyone could speak, a sharp voice cut through the doorway. "What's going on in there? Is the boy even alive?" Eliza. Her silhouette darkened the entrance, lantern in hand, breath fogging the air. She stepped halfway inside, though Henry immediately moved between her and the bed. "He's alive," Henry said, steel filtering into his tone. "Thanks to Diana." Eliza's eyes darted to Diana, widening. "Her? She saved my boy," Henry repeated, "while you were outside stirring trouble." Eliza's lips parted, but no words came. Diana stood slowly. She was pale, tired, but composed. "Eliza," she said softly, "why were the nails pulled from the stable shutter?" The question hung in the air, heavy and certain. The crowd outside hushed instantly. Eliza froze, color draining from her face. What are you talking about?" Diana looked at Henry. "Tell them what you found." Henry stepped forward. "I checked before the storm. Every shutter was sealed tight. Today one was pulled open and the nails weren't loose. They were forced out." Murmurs exploded through the doorway. Eliza shook her head violently. You can't prove anything." But Gideon had risen from his chair, cane tapping the floor. "Girl, your footprints were all over that snow by the stable. You came through the back gate. Why?" Eliza's breath hitched. Panic flickered behind her eyes. Because I just..." Henry's voice was calm, deadly calm. "You wanted Diana gone, but you hurt my boy to do it." Eliza collapsed to her knees, face crumpling. "I didn't mean for him to get that sick," she wailed. "I thought if he caught a chill, Henry would blame her, and she'd leave. I just wanted her gone. Silence swallowed the room. The townsfolk stared, horrified. May covered her mouth. Diana's heart thudded painfully. Not for herself, she was used to being wrongly accused, but for Henry. For the agony in his eyes. He looked at Eliza with the weariness of a man betrayed by someone he once pitied. "Leave," Henry said quietly. "Leave Snow Ridge tonight. Don't come back." Eliza sobbed, scrambling to her feet, stumbling into the night as the crowd stepped away from her, like she carried a cold darker than winter. Henry turned, chest rising and falling. Diana expected anger, heartbreak, fury. Instead, he faced her and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Diana," he said, voice rough, "I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry anyone doubted you." "You didn't," she whispered. "No," Henry answered, "I didn't. And I won't." A warmth spread through her chest, fragile but real. Behind them, Liam coughed softly. Diana moved to tend him again, but Henry touched her shoulder. "You saved my son," he said, voice thick. "I owe you more than thanks." She shook her head. "You owe me nothing. I care for him. He makes me feel like I matter." Henry swallowed hard. "You matter, Diana." For a moment, the winter wind outside fell still. Inside the small cabin, something warmer than firelight grew quietly between them. The night Liam nearly slipped away lingered in the cabin, like a shadow, quiet, humbling, unforgettable. Yet as dawn crept across the Montana prairie, painting the snow in soft gold, the fear began to loosen its grip. Inside the Blackhawk home, life moved with cautious hope. Liam slept peacefully now, his breath steady, his cheeks no longer burning with fever. May kept a hand on his small back, feeling the rise and fall, as if it were a prayer answered. Gideon hummed a tune from his youth, soft and low, tapping his cane in a rhythm that meant peace rather than worry. Diana sat near the stove, warming her hand around a tin cup of peppermint tea. Exhaustion pulled at her bones, but relief carried her through it. She'd stayed awake most of the night, watching over Liam, listening for any change in his breathing, cooling his forehead, whispering soft reassurance only a child half asleep could hear. And every time she glanced toward the doorway, Henry was there, sometimes leaning against the frame, arms crossed, sometimes sitting on the edge of the table, elbows on his knees, always watching over them over her, with an expression she wasn't ready to name. When Liam finally woke, blinking in confusion, Diana and Henry moved toward him at the same time. "Hey there, partner," Henry said softly, ruffling his son's hair. "You gave us quite a scare." Liam frowned. "My chest feels funny." "That's the cold you caught," Diana said gently. "But you're going to be all right now." He reached out to her with small, trusting fingers. "You stayed." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Of course I did." Liam smiled weakly. "Then I wasn't scared." Henry's breath caught. That simple sentence, spoken in a voice still scratchy from the fever, seemed to settle something deep inside him. By mid-morning, word had already spread throughout Snow Ridge that Eliza had confessed her wrongdoing. Folks began trickling to the Blackhawk cabin, with baskets of food, blankets, and awkward apologies, none more humbled than Reverend Hastings, who approached with his hat clutched in both hands. "Miss Diana," he said gently, "we've wronged you, and I hope you'll forgive our haste. Fear makes fools of good people." Diana didn't want to cause division. Snow Ridge might someday be her home, if she could dare to believe in such a thing. So she smiled softly. "There's nothing to forgive." Henry, standing beside her, felt the pride swell in his chest. But as the townsfolk dispersed, their boots crunching through the fresh snow, Henry lingered near her. "You didn't have to forgive them," he murmured. "Maybe they needed it," she replied quietly. "And Maybe I did too. Henry studied her with that quiet, steady attention she was beginning to crave. You've got more strength than most folks I know. Her cheeks warmed. I only did what I had to. That's what makes you strong. As afternoon light softened into the rose gold of early winter evening, May insisted Diana rest. You'll fall over if you don't, she scolded gently. Get off your feet, child. Diana obeyed, settling onto the old love seat near the hearth. The fire crackled softly. Shadows danced across the wooden walls. Outside, the wind had calmed, brushing gently against the cabin, like a lullaby rather than a threat. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Henry was lowering himself into the chair beside her. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. They simply sat, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow across both their faces. Finally, Henry broke the silence. I've been thinking. Diana's heart gave a small, curious lurch. About what? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped a man trying to gather the right words in a world where he'd spent years speaking only when necessary. About what you've brought into this home, he said quietly, not just caring for Liam, not just saving him. He paused, eyes meeting hers with a tenderness that made her breath catch. You've brought light back into this place, into me. Diana felt her throat tighten. Henry, I ain't good with fancy speeches, he continued. But I want you to know something plain. His gaze held hers steady. You're safe here, not just tonight, not just until you find your feet. You're safe for as long as you want to stay. Her breath trembled. For months, she had carried fear like a second skin, fear of being unwanted, unloved, unwelcome. And now this man, this quiet, steady, wounded man, offered her something she hadn't dared imagine. A place, a family, a home. She blinked back tears. I don't know what I can give you in return. Henry's voice softened. You've given plenty already. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth settle between them like a blanket. Liam's small voice drifted from the bedroom. Pa? Miss Diana? Are you still there? Diana rose instinctively, but Henry caught her hand gently, not pulling her back, just holding her for a moment. I'm glad you're here, he whispered. She squeezed his hand. So am I. Together they walked toward Liam's room, toward the soft glow of lamplight, toward a child waiting for comfort, toward a life that no longer felt so uncertain. Outside, winter pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, warmth real and steady finally took root.